cover in today's webinar three major areas. First, what I'm going to do is talk about the difference between natural leadership and how it's different from formal leadership. They're both important to have within a company, and even the CEO can be a natural leader. The difference between a formal leader and a natural leader is the person covering it for also can be a natural leader. And the journey of natural leadership is the same for both of them. So we're going to talk about what makes it different. And then we're going to talk about how natural leadership drives motivation and influence and engagement. It is the source that drives up engagement scores. And then thirdly, we're going to talk about how it transforms and aligns the workplace culture to ensure, of course, success of lean process improvement. We're going to talk a lot about the science behind this, not just the concepts, but the science. What kind of research has been done on these very qualities and characteristics? So let's start out. I want to start out with a story that illustrates that leadership is not about position, power, or control. So, in the 1990s, there was an interchange between British authorities and a ship captain. And off the shores of Great Britain, in the waters off Great Britain, it went like this. The Brits, please adjust your course 15 degrees south in order to avoid a collision. Americans, please adjust your course 15 degrees north in order to avoid a collision. Brits, negative. You'll have to adjust your course, I'm clicking here, 15 degrees south to avoid a collision. Americans, this is the captain. I say again, divert your course. Divert your course. Brits, negative. I say again, you'll have to divert your course. American captain says, this is the captain. I'm the captain of the second largest ship in the North Atlantic Fleet. We have 3 destroyers, 3 battleships, and numerous support ships accompanying us in these waters. You must divert your course now, 13 degrees north, or we'll have to take protective action in order to make sure that you do not undermine these ships. I demand that you divert your course now. That's 15 degrees north now. Brit, this is the lighthouse. Your call. Now that kind of issue gets played out in subtle ways all the way through organizations. When somebody tries to exercise power and control and position in order to exercise leadership, it has the same kind of quality to it. So we're going to talk about what really does create leadership, both formal and informal. Informal being natural leadership. And I want to share a study, which I showed you little pictures of quite a bit there, by mistake, when I was talking through this. It turns out that in southern Italy, in Parma, there were a group of scientists who studied macaw monkeys. And they would wire them up so they could see how their brains, the neurons in their brains fired under various conditions. And they did this for many years, and they discovered that something strange was happening quite often. They never paid a lot of attention to it at first, but what was strange was that the neurons that control our muscles somehow were firing at times, even when the macaw monkey was sitting still. So they decided, let's test this out. So they had the monkey sit in a chair, and they had it raise its arm, lower it, move it across its chest, move back, raise its arm, and lower it again. And then they had the monkey sit there while the researcher did the same thing. And they discovered an amazing thing. The monkey's brain fired exactly the same way it did when it was watching somebody else as it did when the monkey was doing that activity. It was the neurons that control muscles that were firing that way. This led to an explosion of research. And Marco Iacomini wrote a whole book on mirroring people based on that research. It turns out that when they started to do it with humans, they discovered that it was far more than just the muscles that were affected by another person. It was mood. It was the degree of happiness. It was whether they were toxic or not toxic. A whole range of qualities were being transmitted through mirroring. As a result of this, what they discovered is that many traits, moods, behaviors, get transmitted through these neurons, through just watching and being around somebody. And then they started doing some other research. They said, well, that's because the monkey sees people and we see people. So they did a piece of research in which they put 3 people in a room, one of whom they knew was happy, and the other 2 were neutral, and said, we don't want you to look at each other, we don't want you to have any contact whatsoever, just sit there and stare straight ahead for 5 minutes, which they did. The 2 people that went in that were neutral came out happier than when they went in. They picked up the mood of the person, the third person who was happy. They reversed it, the same thing happened with unhappiness. So natural leadership is based on the fact that we influence people all the time based on who we are and what we're like. And that influence is, in fact, a source of leadership because it changes people's behavior. And the influence, there are other ways we influence people, but that influence is a very powerful one. Now, why do we call it natural leadership? Because for some people, the kind of behavior that brings people forward is just natural. They've been doing it all of their lives. And they have a series of attributes, and they carry those attributes with them all the time, no matter what they're doing or who they're with. So that's a form of leadership because it influences people. So natural leaders influence people by the way they are, by their very presence. It requires an open heart, self-awareness, commitment to an appreciation of your own and others' humanity. Anyone, anywhere can do it. But this is the way most organizations look. At the right end of that bell-shaped curve are the people that, no matter who they're with, they exert those moods, those behaviors, and have that kind of influence. The overwhelming majority of the people in an organization we could call followers. And at the other end are negative influencers. So if the people that are called followers are around people who are negative influencers, they feel more negative. And they act that way. And you know what it's like when you have toxic people in your organization. You can see how it affects the people around them. You notice that the people in that bell-shaped curve who tend toward the negative influencer end have a lot of those qualities themselves. They're more easily influenced. The same is true for the people at the natural leader end. They carry natural leadership implicitly in their moods and so forth. And so they're more easily influenced by natural leaders. Interesting thing about this influence is that it influences everybody to 3 degrees of separation. The influence goes not just from me to the people that I'm with right now, but it goes from those people to the next round. And from those people, it will go to another round, which is not up there. But nevertheless, it happens, 3 degrees. Now, this means that it affects everybody in the usual workplace. It means that the person that's working on the changing bedpans in a hospital affects the patient. The person who's doing something that doesn't seem to have any impact on the patient is really, with their mood and their natural leadership, affecting the others. So leadership is not just about motivating people, however. It's about helping people motivate themselves. And the goal is to have that kind of a diagram, where the natural leaders are at the right end, and look at how that curve goes up. That's what you want in the workplace. You've got some followers, but most of the people are natural leaders. Now, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what kind of leadership this really is. We're not just talking about influence, we're talking about something else. We've all read about rats going through mazes, and how that gave rise to stimulus response. The whole idea of stimulus response is, if you put some cheese at the other end of that maze, the rat's going to go for it, and he's going to find his way to it one way or another. And that orientation toward leadership has been there for a long time. A few years ago, they decided not to put anything at the other end of the maze and see what happened to those rats. And they discovered that the rat, once they put him in there, even though he'd never been in a maze before, his curiosity was taking him through the thing and he was having a good time. And he made it all the way through it, and in fact made it through faster than the rat that was being stimulated by cheese. And then he discovered a couple other things. That not only did that rat make it through faster, but he remembered longer. And he was more innovative and changed faster. In other words, he found those places that were dead ends and didn't use them the next time. The rat did it just for the enjoyment of doing it. Now, they've done some other research based on that. They've done some studies of artists, and they've discovered something very interesting. They discovered that artists who are paid to do their art don't do as good art as the ones who just do it for the satisfaction of doing it. And they compared the art, they collected art from both kinds of people, and gave them to some critics who didn't know that that's the difference that they were looking for. Sure enough, the critics judged their art as far superior, where the people were doing it from what was coming inside, just for the pure enjoyment of it. We're going to pick up on that in a minute, because what is it that really inspires their motivation, innovation, and engagement? Natural leaders inspire and influence others using 3 intrinsic motivators. And those motivators have been the subject of a tremendous amount of studies since the, I would say, mid-1980s, when a guy named Deci is the one who really identified the difference among those motivators. The first motivator is the fulfillment of the essential self. It's being the best version of who you are. Deci called this autonomy. And by autonomy, he didn't mean just go do your own thing. What he meant was feeling your own uniqueness, experiencing that. The second motivator was authentic connection without boundaries. And once again, he took it further than that. What he was saying was, it's intrinsically motivating to us to want to be generous to other people. You know how you get a good feeling when you're generous to somebody. And DC is saying that's an intrinsic motivator. He took it a third place. He said intrinsic motivators also are activated by improvement. In the middle of the 20th century, Jascha Heifetz, I don't know if you remember him or not, but he was one of the greatest violinists of the 20th century. He had just given a concert, and following the concert, one of the better critics of the world interviewed him, and he said, Mr. Heifetz, why is it, how does it feel, is what he really asked him, how does it feel to be so good that other people can't even see your flaws, not even the best critics? And he said, almost surprised, I see it. And my biggest satisfaction is identifying them and improving. A similar thing happened with Vladimir Horowitz. He gave his last concert when he was 90. And I was lucky enough that I heard on the radio a replay of it, but it wasn't the actual concert. And it had such wisdom in it that it just moved me as I was driving across South Florida, what's called Alligator Alley. 5 years later, he was interviewed by a critic. Now he's 95. And the critic is sitting there talking about his life and so forth. And then he says, now I have a really important question to ask you, Mr. Heifetz. You're 95 years old. You're never going to give another concert. Your last concert was 5 years ago. Why is it you keep practicing 20 hours a day? I mean 10 hours a day, I'm sorry. 10 hours a day. 20 hours, that'd be a lot. And he said, to get better. Number 3 on that list, improvement, learning, and growing, is why he practiced 10 hours a day. Don't we all know that money is a real motivator? And if we could just be rich enough, we'll be happy. In fact, they did some studies with very rich people who were billionaires. And they asked them, you know, how much money would you have to make in order to really be happy? And to a person, they said, triple what I'm making now. Triple. Didn't matter how much they were making, it was triple. What they discovered is some interesting things about people who are driven extrinsically by making money. They discovered, for example, that when they show them a picture of a child with cancer, their empathic neurons don't fire. When they show a poor person the same picture, there's an explosion of neurons. Great empathy. They discovered that rich people tell more lies, they cheat more, they violate the rules of the road, and get this, take candy from children and shoplift. A multi-billionaire picking something up in a store and putting it away. Now, not all very rich people do that. There are a lot of very rich people who set up funds to help people around the world. It's because, for them, being rich doesn't matter most. It's their self-expression that matters most. But if being rich does matter most, it doesn't motivate you as a natural leader at all. It dampens the very things you want. Now, Hendrik Hertzberg did a lot of studies of this in the late 60s into the 70s, and he wrote a paper, wrote a book about it, but the paper he wrote, article for Harvard Business Review, turned out to be the most requested article in its history, and still is. It's titled, one more time, how do you motivate people? The case he makes is very simple. Yes, money motivates us to step up until we have enough, till we think what we're doing is worth what we're being paid. If you pay somebody more than that, it doesn't increase their engagement at all. It's not a motivator. They like it, it's pleasurable, but it doesn't motivate them. So intrinsic motivators are what natural leadership is all about. And the intrinsic motivators are the key to engagement and buy-in. And I want to talk for a second about engagement. The Gallup organization has been doing studies of engagement for 20 years. One of the themes they found in those studies of engagement is that something like $350 billion to $450 billion a year are wasted because of low engagement in the Fortune 100 companies of this country. Think about that. It's hidden money. Nobody even knows that it isn't there. It's all because people are engaged. They're motivated extrinsically. So leadership needs to take a new form. From the top, moving from top-down prescriptive leadership to connecting people to their own intrinsic motivators. And to do this, one of the qualities of it is that leadership begins to operate from pull rather than push. Pull is the attraction that is set into motion in response to anything that's significant or important to us and is given attention. When what's significant is our essential self, it becomes an intrinsic motivator. So, the interesting thing about all of this is that the knowledge about intrinsic motivators we've had through the millennia. A guy by the name of Lao Tzu lived 2,500 years ago. He said those four things. Now think about that as lean. That's what you're doing in the workplace. Lao Tzu said that's what you should do. He said learn from the people. Plan with the people. Begin with what they have. Build on what they know. That's what's beautiful about the lean processes that you're involved in. That's the essence of what natural leadership is about. Bringing that inside of the person. And then he said one other thing that's been a shocker for 3 millennia. Of the best leaders, when their task is accomplished, the people say, we've done it ourselves. They own it. And so they celebrate it. So, let's talk about natural leadership. Mike showed you this slide. In the middle are habits. In the next concentric circle are practices. And in the outside circle are attributes. We're going to pick up on the habits and practices in a deeper way in future webinars, but let me just say a little bit about them right now. What are the habits? People live deliberately, and what does that mean? That means they're aware of the here and now and what's going on inside themselves and the degree to which they're feeling intrinsically motivated right now, day by day. They're aware of the observer they are. And what does that mean? It means that they're aware of the fact that we see the world as we are, not as it is. And when they see the world in twisted ways, they step back and ask, what am I saying inside of my own head that causes me to see the world that way? They know they're their mirror. They understand that people pick up on their attitudes their beliefs, their desires. They pivot when they see themselves going down the wrong direction in terms of these other habits. And right at the core is their desire to consistently recognize and fulfill their essential self. Now,